Hey y'all, what is going on? What is going on? It's your girl, Melba Pearson, Melba for Miami, Melba for Justice, also known as the resident legal diva. And it's time for another Mondays with Melba. So, unfortunately, life comes at you fast. So, I was in Idaho. I'm dealing with some family stuff for the last 2 Mondays. Unfortunately, my signal was not as strong as I would like. So, I refused to send out a subpar product. So, want to make sure that y'all can see me, hear me, and understand the information clearly. So figured I'd take a little hiatus, come back for today. We'll be off for Memorial Day next Monday, and then we'll be back again for a very action-packed June Mondays with Melba. So the topic of today is about Roe v. Wade. Before I get into that, let me just share a quick update with regards to Senate Bill 90, which passed here in Florida last legislative session, as in 1 year ago, not as in last couple months ago. So there was a lawsuit around that particular bill because of its impact on voting rights. So this was the bill that passed that said you couldn't give water to people who are standing online at the polling places. It made it very difficult for third parties to help register folks to vote without registering and doing a whole bunch of other steps. You know, there are a lot of things that really impacted accessibility to the polls and just making voting easier and more comfortable, right? So that was very disturbing when that bill passed. There was a lawsuit that was then filed, and the court came back and said, you know what? We agree with you, plaintiffs. We think that this bill is really going to impact voting rights in a negative way. And the judge even went so far as to say, Florida, if you're going to make any more changes to voting rights or anything having to do with voting, you need to come back to this court to ask for permission because y'all keep screwing it up and y'all keep doing it in a racist way. Basically, sum and substance is what the judge said. Well, unfortunately, there was an appeals court that the governor went and appealed this decision to, and the appeals court came back and said, no, you're good. So unfortunately, this law is now back in play. So we had thought we were going to get a little bit of reprieve when it came to registering people and doing voter outreach efforts for the primary going forward. The reason why the appeals court came back and basically said that the law has to stand as it is because of the fact that it was too close to the primaries. So the battle still continues. This is not over yet. And just know that I will keep y'all posted when it comes to anything having to do with voting rights and Senate Bill 90. Okay, pivoting now to the main event, the main topic, which is the fallout from Roe v. Wade. Now, we all heard about the leak of the Supreme Court draft of their opinion with regards to the case that came out of the cases coming out of Mississippi and Texas around their bans on abortion. And we call it an abortion ban because if you're saying 6 weeks, that's a ban on abortion because you're not going to know that you're pregnant most of the time until past that mark. We're also seeing in Oklahoma how the governor is intending to sign into law basically like the minute you get pregnant, as in the minute there's a fertilization, now you can't go and get an abortion, which is, again, insane. So we know that this is going to keep going and that whether or not the 6 weeks stands or not, they're going to keep chopping and chipping away at this. But what was really scary about the leak from the Supreme Court, which was, first of all, number one, the fact there was a leak. That is not the norm. That has not really happened too much in Supreme Court history. But the thing that was really disturbing was Justice Alito was the one who basically wrote this opinion, right? And so how it basically works is that you'll have one justice basically write the main opinion and the other justices kind of weigh in either in agreement. So it'll be what's called like the concurring opinion, or they completely disagree with what the majority thinks, and they write a dissent, right? So Alito basically was writing the opinion for the majority, saying that Roe versus Wade should be rolled back, right? So the disturbing thing about it is some of the reasoning that he shared in his opinion. And one of the things that he said was that there was no explicit right to an abortion in the Constitution. So when you go through the Constitution from cover to cover, looking at all the amendments, there's no explicit, all Americans have the right to an abortion. And so because of that, He feels that since there's no explicit right in the Constitution, that this is not a right that needs to be protected, and therefore it should go back to each individual state to make a decision as to what abortion will look like in their state, as opposed to having this federal cover that Roe v. Wade provided for close to 50 years, right? So what is really, really scary and disturbing about that is the following. There are a lot of things we don't have an explicit right to in the Constitution. So when you think about the right to be able to marry whoever you want, right? When you think about education, the right to an education, those aren't things that are explicit in the Constitution, yet through case law from year over year, generation over generation, those rights were fought for and carved out as key things that really support that idea of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, right? So when you say there's no explicit right to an abortion in the Constitution, you can use that same logic in other types of cases moving forward. That's what's so dangerous about this. So for instance, in looking at marriage, look at the case of Loving versus Virginia. That was the case that allowed for interracial marriage in this country, right? Again, there's no explicit right to marriage in the Constitution. So if you decide to strip away that right, so let's say Alabama, which was the last state to comply with Loving versus Virginia and remove their laws off the books saying if you are of different races, you can't get married, right? They were the last people, very last people to comply. Let's say they turn around and decide, you know what? We're going to direct our clerks not to give marriage licenses to interracial couples anymore. Okay, so an interracial couple goes and sues and says, listen, this is against, Loving versus Virginia and all of this, long held precedent. This is a problem. We need to be able to get married. Using the logic that would come out of this case, the court can then say, listen, there's no explicit right to be able to marry whoever you want. So sorry, that's up to the state. And unfortunately, you live in Alabama. So we suggest you move. Don't know what to tell you, right? That could literally happen. Because literally, when you look back at these old cases, you take the logic that was set forth in those cases, and that's how you build on and create more case law, more precedent to be able to give everybody the rights that many of us take for granted at this point, right? You think about the Obergefell case. That was the case that allowed for people of the same sex to get married, right? And so now, using that same logic, using that, let's say that court clerk, I think she was out of Kentucky, that said she was not going to give same-sex couples, their marriage licenses. She ended up getting sued. It was a whole thing. And because of the fact that, the Obergefell case is well-settled law at this point, right? She had to either comply or lose her job, right? So now, with that same argument that Alito is making in this case, Kentucky could turn around and say, we're not going to give same-sex couples marriage licenses anymore. The same-sex couple goes and sues. Oh, wait, there's no constitutional right to you be able to get married in this country. So it's up to the state that you're in. So sorry that you live in Kentucky. Y'all might as well move because there's nothing we can do for you, right? So that's how the dangerous slippery slope of some of these arguments starts to happen. And then lastly, now we have the Texas governor talking about public education and saying, wait a minute, I don't think we're going to fund public education anymore. Okay, what now? But be that as it may, he can turn around and say, listen, once this case ends up, the final opinion comes out, it's now law, he can turn around and say, basically, there's no right in the Constitution to an education. So we as a state don't have to provide that. Is that a horrible idea? Absolutely, right? Because do you just want all of your kids uneducated? And if so, why? But I'll just put a pin in that for another day. But if the governor goes ahead and decides that he wants to stop funding public education, right? Again, if there is no constitutional right to a public education, now we can see that being attacked around the country. And I want to touch on one other thing, because I know there's some folks who are going around saying, oh, well, all of these people so worried about interracial marriage. Well, Clarence Thomas is in an interracial marriage, so it's going to be safe, right? Yeah, no. right? So first of all, anybody saying that has not read his opinions in the last, 40 years that he's been on the bench, right? Because he doesn't care about voting against his own interests. Well, let's just put it that way. Secondly, how this would work is that it wouldn't be retroactive. So the court can now come back and say, all right, what you did was legal at the time, it's illegal now, and we're going to arrest you for it. So to just use me as an example, as everyone knows, I'm in an interracial marriage, right? My husband is white. And it's not like if this passes and now Florida decides that they're going to outlaw interracial marriage because there's no constitutional right to it, that the police are going to show up at our door and arrest us for being in an interracial marriage, right? It wouldn't go backwards, which is otherwise known as retroactive. It would be any couple moving forward who wants to get married and goes down to the clerk's office. If that law does come into play, now they will not be able to get married and they would have to move to another state or whatever the case may be. So that's how come this can be so dangerous and so problematic. And the composition of the court doesn't really matter moving forward for this purpose. So what can we do, right? So number one, we need to see federal protections for abortion. And that would be something that would be passed through, Congress and the Senate, right? And that's something that I know Vice President Kamala Harris has talked about. A lot of folks have been talking about that as well. Senators, other folks want to introduce this type of bill. Do we have the numbers? Probably not right now, especially in the Senate. Because, of course, if you have one or two senators from the Democratic side, we're looking at you, Manchin and Sinema, but you have one or two senators move from the side of the Democrats to the Republicans and vote against having federal protections on abortion. It's not going to happen, right? So that's why, reminder, voting has consequences, right? Because now, as we think about the primaries and we think about the elections in November for the House representatives that are going to be up, as well as the Senate seats that are going to be up, it's going to be really important to get a more moderate to progressive majority who are going to vote in favor of abortion access and reproductive justice access, right? Because again, what I think a lot of people are forgetting about all this is that this is about having a choice. Nobody is saying you have to go out and have an abortion. If you don't want to, if that's not what your moral values dictate, then don't, right? But it's to give folks the option who need to, right? So you think about the fact most of these laws, the anti-abortion laws that are passing are saying no abortions in the case of incest or sexual assault or even human trafficking, no carve-outs for any of that. So you think about an 11-year-old girl that's been, molested by her family member, ends up getting pregnant, right? Because you're 11 years old and your reproductive system already started working. Now you're pregnant. So is that 11-year-old emotionally and mentally, physically ready to be a parent? And what kind of hope is that child going to grow up in if you're in this family that's filled with abuse and manipulation and all that type of stuff, right? And trauma. So that's not going to work. Or you think about somebody that survived a sexual assault. They're saying a lot of places are doing the no carve-outs, but in some places they're saying, like for instance in Florida, if you reported the sexual assault to law enforcement, then you would be able to go ahead and get an abortion. Well, maybe you don't want to talk to law enforcement about it. Again, it's a very personal decision, right? I'm a survivor of sexual assault. I didn't report it to the police because I was dealing with a lot of shame and trauma and everything that was going on. And I just wasn't in a place where I could talk about it. I mean, still to this day, I very rarely talk about it because it was something very painful for me. And so you think about folks that are in that position, you don't want to have to force them to go to law enforcement if they're not ready. Right? Like that causes more trauma to the survivor, and that's not okay. They should be able to deal with one thing at a time. And if the thing right now they need to deal with is having an abortion so they don't have to carry the person that violated them, carry their seed to fruition, I mean, that might be the first thing to deal with. And then maybe in a few months, you're going to go through therapy. And then you're like, all right, I feel strong enough to report this. Okay, now I'm ready to go through the court process. Or maybe you never get to that point. But again, that's up to you. That's giving you the ability and the power to make the decision that's best for your life at this moment. right? And let's even talk about the bigger issue around the how you want to force people to give birth, but yet and still, Black women who give birth in this country are 3 times more likely to die in the process than their white counterparts. But yet nothing's been done to address that. But we want to force you to give birth, even though it may kill you, right? And when it comes to how we fund early childhood, whether it comes to food programs or education, childcare, all of those things that are necessary for families who work, which is the majority of families in this country, we barely fund that. Right? We fund Medicare and all of these other aspects for adults and for the elderly as well. We should. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we are not investing enough money in the kids. So if you end up in a situation where you have a child and now you're in poverty and you're not sure how you're going to be able to, make your bills and feed your kids and all that, and you got to rely on Medicaid or other programs, number one, there's the stigma. But then number two, there's a limit to the resources that are available. So again, by forcing people to give birth, you are creating a situation where folks are just going to stay in poverty. And if you stay in poverty, what happens? That increases the likelihood of crime. That increases other strain to the system, which is a strain to our tax dollars, right? So there's so many reasons why abortion should stay as a choice in this country. Not to mention the majority of Americans don't want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. Only about 20% of Americans want to see it overturned. The majority do not, right? Either they affirmatively want it to stay in place, or they just basically have no opinion and are like, I'm not worried about it. So again, you have a minority that's operating against the will of the people, which is really, really disturbing. So this is why we have to vote. We have to make sure that we're voting for pro-choice candidates. And it's super easy. You go on the candidates' websites. If you have that option to vote by mail and you chose to do so, that gives you that opportunity to be able to sit in your house at leisure and research these candidates and see where they stand on these issues. Even if you did not decide to vote by mail and you're going to vote in person, you can get a sample ballot either emailed to you, or you can go on your local supervisor elections website and get that downloaded so that, again, you go into the ballot box knowing who is a pro-choice candidate and who is not. So just super important that we, keep all of this in mind. Looking to see if there's anything else that I need to address here. The answer to that is no. So that is the deal. So next steps. Number one, educate yourself on pro-choice candidates. Number two, if you have the ability and bandwidth, donate or volunteer for any of these abortion funds who are helping women and people that give birth get access to the care they need. Because think about it, if the ban in Florida stands, the closest place to get an abortion outside of Florida is North Carolina. And if North Carolina drops, which I think it will, the next place will be Illinois. And you think about it, right now, flights are expensive. Listen, a flight from Miami to Chicago can easily run you, $400 or $500. And then you have to think about time off from work, childcare for your kids if you have kids already, hotel stay, foods when you're up there. So all of these logistics cost money, and folks may not have that kind of resources. So if you can donate, I'm going to drop a few abortion funds in the comments, and feel free to Google more. And also donate to places like the Planned Parenthood, Southern Birth. My God, okay. Like I'm thinking about the doulas, the Black doulas who are like doing amazing work around educating people and showing them what their options are. So there's so many great organizations that are doing this work. So I'm going to make sure to tag them in the comments, as well as in any logos that I do around, or any captions, that I do around this wonderful session that we had today. All right, y'all. So just a reminder, next Monday is Memorial Day. So I will not be having a show. I'm going to be off for the day. Wishing everybody an amazing long weekend. But then I'll be back in June, which is LGBTQ Awareness Month. So I'm going to be bringing on folks from SAVE. Also, we have Juneteenth, which is the anniversary of the enslaved people in Texas learning that they were in fact free. So that is going to be amazing. I'm bringing on some some folks to talk about that. And of course, in continuing to center the people in the city of Buffalo who had to endure this horrible, horrible racist act, I'm going to actually be bringing on my firearms instructor and friend, Lou from Pretty Shooters / Lou Tactical, to talk about self-defense in the Black community and what that should look like in this current day and age. So lots of great stuff on deck. Definitely stay tuned, stay engaged, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.